Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Richard Skipper celebrates the best in entertainment. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Happy Sunday, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. For those of you who are here for the first time, my show is all about celebrating. It's about celebrating life. It's about celebrating art. It's about celebrating artists. And anyone who knows me knows of my love of Carol Channing and Hello, Dolly. Well, in 1982 and 1983, there was an amazing tour that toured all over the United States and Hawaii. One of the first, I think the first show that went there. And this group of incredible people, I'm bringing Kasira on right now, Kasira McKee, who I just absolutely love. She contacted me a few weeks ago and she said, we should do a reunion here, bringing cast members. And I believe that, and we just saw each other off camera, that you're all seeing each other for the first time in almost 40 years. Am I right?
Most of us. I do see Kevin on occasion. We're both from Dallas. And originally, I'm in New Mexico now, but I run into him on occasion. But yes, for the rest of us, I think, yes, we have not seen each other in person for many, many years. Yeah.
Now, what I'm finding over my research with this particular tour, these two tours, is the love that you all have for each other. What was it about this particular tour? And of course, there was Carol Channing being the matriarch of this incredible company. But what was it about this company that brought all of you together and that you've remained in touch over all these years?
Well, first of all, most of the cast was from Texas. We have several of us had a history at Dallas Summer Musicals, where it was first cast. I grew up with Tom Hughes. My uncle, one of my grandfathers worked for him. Kevin had already previously performed there. Jennifer performed there. And then also Tina Walsh, who you interviewed the other day. We've all known each other since we were kids, so literally children. So a lot of us knew each other or knew of each other, and we were cast together, which was delightful. And, you know, we're friendly because we're from Texas.
That's right.
We're friendly people. And if you don't want to be our friend, damn it, we're going to make you our friend. So just accept it and be our friend. And that's what we did. We just made friends with everybody. We, you know, the leads were the people that played the lead roles. Most of them were really friendly, and we just became a big family because we did two tours together. You know, and we were hilarious. Everybody in the show, chorus, dancers, leads, everybody was really funny. But also, I believe, and Robert knows the count, there were over 50 of us in the company. It's a huge company, including the crew and staff and every, you know, so it was a big group of us and we all knew each other. It was great. I think the answer is we're from Texas and we're friendly.
Okay. Well, you mentioned Robert Nolan. I'm going to bring him on camera right now. But Kasira, I want to ask you before we get to Robert, was this your first national tour?
Yes.
Okay.
Janie and I and Kevin were the youngest people in the show. Kevin's only, I think, a couple of months older than me, and Janie's we have the birthdays around the same time. Yes, it was my first national tour. I think I was 19 or 20 when I was cast.
Now, how long had you been with Dallas Summer Musicals when the audition came about to audition for this?
Well, as I said, I grew up there, but this was the first show I ever did there. When I was a teenager, Tom Hughes allowed me to audition underage for the experience, because he wanted me to experience what it's like to audition in front of 1,000 people. Our cattle call in Dallas was, the numbers were astronomical. I think there was at least 400 to 600 men and 200 to 400 women in the cattle call alone. And that's daunting when you have, an auditorium full of critics who all want the job. It was daunting. But yes, my first tour, and I was very young, and so was Kevin, so was Jamie.
And Robert, if you can tell us about your experiences and how you got involved with this particular production.
Well, when I was in 1981, I was here without a job in New York, and a friend of mine that I went to college with had done Dolly at the Lunt in the late 70s, and he met his wife there. And I said, "Oh my God, I don't have a job." And his wife said, "Well, I hear Carol and Charles," she had done Lorelei as well. I hear Carol and Charles are taking out a tent tour of Hello Dolly this summer. And we played all the Valley Forge Music Fair, Westbury, all those, Wallingford, Connecticut, literally intense. And I think Terry Lacy was there too on that tour. And I thought, well, 13 weeks out of New York in the summer, great. Well, that turned into 4 years with them, with Carol and Charles. And then this Dolly, these 2 Dolly tours. And then I did Jerry's Girls, the pre-Broadway, with them. And the thing about Dallas was, Tom Hughes had this thing where a producer in New York Tom would launch the tour in Dallas. And it was advantageous because when you're in Dallas, you were on a stock contract. You weren't on a contract. So you could rehearse and perform under a stock contract. You could have your scenery built in Dallas, which was, even though it was still stamped by the IA, a union house, but the rates were less expensive. In return, the great thing that Tom did was the principals were able to come from New York, but the ensemble had to be hired from Dallas. 2 stage managers came from New York. 1 stage manager had to be from Dallas. And I think an associate conductor, but Terry LeBolt will know that better than me. So it gave all these Dallas talent a chance to go on the road and get their equity cards, perhaps. And you got 2 examples today of Jennifer Smith and Kevin Ligon, who came to New York and have never stopped working since that moment. Correct, guys?
And are joined at the hip.
And they are, I was going to say, they're still together.
Literally.
I'm telling you what, Richard, my favorite moment ever, ever, ever with Hello Dolly was when I went to see, Kevin was Dolly was one of the shows that was written for singers, and there were singers and dancers. There was no triple threat back then requirement. And Kevin was in the singing ensemble. And when I walked into the Schubert Theater with Bette Midler playing Dolly Levi and saw Kevin Ligon playing Rudolph, I began to cry.
Oh.
Because it was like everything was full circle, you know? Well, I think other than Carol Channing, Kevin has probably done more productions of Dolly than any other person. Kevin,
I think so too.
Yes, you've done Dolly with Ruta Lee and with Carol, and who else? And Bette Midler, of course, and Donna Murphy and Bernadette Peters, and everyone here.
And I did a high school production when I was a little kid.
So did I, by the way.
They just hired kids to be on the street and be clowns in the parade.
Well, let me ask each of you, what does this show hold emotionally for each of you? And we'll just go around and then we'll bring on some of the other players as well, beyond the obvious things that we all know. But what does it mean personally to you, for example, Kasira?
When I was, in Texas, back in the day, I mean, it's revived itself, but there was a break in Dallas where it wasn't a big deal. But back in the 70s, 80s, and now a resurgence. Musical theater was really big. It was as big as football.
Mm-hmm.
And in junior high, Franklin Junior High, I did Bloody Mary. And so my sophomore year, my new music teacher, Roy Johnson, who was very well known in Dallas, including his wife, decided to do Hello, Dolly. And I auditioned. I didn't even sing a Dolly song. I sang Yes, New York, it's really as far to be, and Cornelius, because I could belt it, right? And he said, thank you. And he cast me, to the chagrin of all the older girls in school. So that was my first experience doing this show at Hillcrest High School.
Mm-hmm.
And in 77, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I always loved the show. And later on, I found out that my music teacher was on the board of DSM, and I did not know that. And he cast me in the leads every year in the show, and I didn't know it until I auditioned for Hello, Dolly with Carol Channing and got cast in the chorus, that he'd been kind of training me and grooming me. And it was just one of the foremost shows I ever did. It's one of my favorites. And so I don't know about the rest of you when we were young, but when I was cast, I had to pinch myself. I couldn't believe it. I also got cast at the same time with Ruta Lee in Whorehouse at Casa. And they called to cast me, and I said, I actually just got the show with Carol Channing, Hello, Dolly. And they said, oh, so does that mean you don't want to do Casa Manana's Best Little Whorehouse in Texas? And I said, yeah, kinda. And Casa never cast me again. But it was worth it. It was totally worth it, So my experiences from high school of actually doing the actual show, and we rented our costumes from Eves Brooks in New York when it was still open. We did these big fundraisers. So that's my history of the show, and to be in it for 2 tours was amazing.
And Terry LeBolt, we got you here as well. If you welcome, by the way, we didn't get a chance to speak before we went live, so I'm glad you made it here. But what was the biggest impact that these particular tours had on you, and any experiences that you can share with? You actually took the show to Hawaii as well, which must have been an amazing experience.
Yes, it was. Well, I back up just a little bit before Robert, because I met Carol during Sugar Babies with Robert Morse. There was a national tour, and I was literally walking down Broadway, and I had been in New York for a month or 3 weeks, and I ran into somebody, and he said, they're looking for a pianist. And the next Monday, I met Carol, and she was taller than me with her shoes on.
And that's tall.
Yeah, so we began then. I was the assistant conductor, and then the conductor knew that his time was coming to an end sometime soon, and he was very generous. Pat Holland was his name. He was very generous, and he taught me all the ins and outs of working with Carol and Charles. And then I went and did the nightclub act with Carol as her music director, and that's when so really Robert and I, we became like an entourage. We had different experiences. A lot of hotel suite, and we used to fly on Sunday night in a private plane to the next town so Carol could do press on Monday. And so we would literally, the limo would pull up to the stage door. We'd throw our luggage in. They'd drive on to the tarmac, and we'd get into a plane. And Carol would sit in the co-pilot seat and say things like, "Are you sure you have enough gas?" And
can you imagine that happening now? No.
But really, the thing I think that is the most beneficial to me is that Carol's electricity. Because as a teacher now, it's like, when I began working with her, I was very good conductor and pianist, and maybe I could say I was excellent, but that's not enough for Carol. You got to be way beyond excellent to be in a room. And I can't imagine Davis and the rest of you standing on stage next to her, what that felt like. I've done the act, so I have a rough idea. But I mean, the energy level is so beyond 100 that I can't describe it to you. And so when I'm teaching now, you know, I often say, you know, what is the difference between artistry and mere excellence?
Mhm.
And that's really where I try to take people, you know, because Carol took me by the lapels and kind of brought me up there with her. You have to go where she is, or you'll just get steamrolled.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you'll just be destroyed by the whole process. And so you have to go right up there. And I'm getting very excited just thinking about it.
Well,
there
we've
was
got the
no-
incredible Davis Gaines here, and Davis,
Absolutely.
speaking of artistry and excellence, both you possess.
He looks exactly the
He
same.
looks exactly the same.
Stop.
It's
I put my
true.
glasses on.
But
Hello,
Davis, thank
Barnaby.
you for being here today. And one of the things that I'd love for you to talk about is the sense of loyalty. I was at Carol's 90th birthday party, and you performed there. You also performed and sang and spoke at her memorial beautifully.
Thank you.
But you have, over the years, maintained this phenomenal friendship beyond what took place on stage. And if you can talk a little bit about that.
Besides getting that role of Cornelius, which, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. That was a big turning point for me to get that role. Previously, I had done roles, but I mostly did the ensemble and national tours of Best Little Whorehouse with Alexis Smith and Camelot with Richard Burton. But to get Cornelius was, for me and my career, a big turning point, because it was an amazing role opposite a huge star. And I'll never forget going for my audition. I had to go to Jerry Herman's townhouse, Brownstone, and climb the stairs to the top to solarium where his piano was. And there was Carol, Jerry, and Lucia Victor sitting there, and I sang It Only Takes a Moment, and I got the gig. And I felt so lucky and grateful. And I came in the second round of this tour, and the guys in the cast and we're already together as a group and already bonded, but they were so welcoming, and as was Carol. And I'm so grateful for that chance, and it changed my life along the way. And to get to know her and remain her friend until the end was just truly, truly special. And I don't, you know, she was with me all through everything I ever did, and in fact, she asked me to spend a weekend with her in Palm Springs by just the two of us in her apartment for like 4 days. And I have
There's
so
some
many
great stories there.
I have so many stories about that. It was amazing. And I can tell you many, many stories about her and how kind she was to me and how supportive she was to me. And I was just, when I played that role, I just, like Terry said, I just stood back and let her do her thing and just supported her in what she did. And just, you know, that's, you know, you had to just stand back and let it go and just let this like aura take over. And I'm just so grateful that I kept in touch with her and knew her after Hello, Dolly.
Now, I hate to say this, but next year will be, if I'm not mistaken, 40 years.
That's ridiculous.
Since this tour took place. We have a lot of people waiting in the wings because Sarah's the glue that put everything together here today. So thank you. And I'm just going to bring people on so that you all can see each other again. Any stories that you want to share, anything you want to bring to the forefront. And we're going to start here with this wonderful man here, Mike Booker.
Mike.
Hi.
Does Mike? Can you hear us, Mike?
Yes, I'm sorry. You're cutting in and out here. Cutting in and out.
Well, I apologize for that.
I was originally in the cast in the 1978 in the Broadway revival, so I kind of floated through many years, and I'll tell you what, as a 24-year-old kid from Wichita, walking into that audition, I'd only been in New York a couple of years, and had just received my equity card from Children's Theater or Young People's Theater, I think we call it nowadays. But so this was, and like Sarah, it was a cattle call, and when that went into backstage, that Hello Dolly was happening, that just exploded, and you could barely get in the doors there for auditions. But I walked in with everyone else, and it's still a complete blur. I don't remember what happened over those couple of weeks. It just all happened so fast. And I never really thought that I would ever walk on stage with, a living legend like Carol. But it happened. It happened. And
well, Mike, I want to ask you that first time
it was a turning point. Maybe not a turning point in my career, but a turning point in my confidence as a performer, as an actor, and able to walk into other auditions thinking, yeah, something, I may have a little bit. I may have a little bit here. And but it was an amazing 6 or 7 years. And along the way, the performers, especially the Texas folks, the Texas folks were a young group with so much energy, and I'm sure it took a little while for us to all get to know each other, but it was a wild and crazy company. Wild and crazy.
Well, I'm going to bring our next guest on, and as Elizabeth Hansen, I'm going to just bring her on right here. And hello, Elizabeth.
Hello, Dolly. Hey, how is everybody?
It's wonderful, thank you.
I can't believe it's been 40 years. Because it's only been 20 for me. So,
if each of you can weigh in about the cachet of what your experiences were like auditioning and moving beyond Hello Dolly in terms of walking into an audition, having a credit like Hello Dolly with Carol Channing on your resume. Anyone?
Gosh.
It still makes a difference. I mean, it's still one of my most incredible credits I'm most proud of, and it still means a great deal to everyone. It's pretty special.
It's my best name drop.
Yeah.
It's my best name drop.
Exactly.
It's like,
my best
get it
stories.
with Carol. Get it with Carol.
Elizabeth, what was your earliest, what is your first experience of sharing a stage with Carol Channing?
Here's what I loved about Carol. I always used to say that I think I got the job because I made her laugh. Do you remember how she, if her dressing room wasn't big enough, she'd use the green room, and I remember she would use the green room, and all of our trunks were in there. And remember, she used to take some oxygen before she'd go on stage. And I walked in to get something out of my trunk, and she had the thing on her face, and I walked back out, and I went, "Oh, by the way, you have something on your face." And I just left, and she just started laughing so hard. So, but I loved being on stage with her. Actually, I found myself watching her. Whenever she would do Before the Parade Passes By, I would just stand in the wings and soak it up because it was magical. Mm-hmm. And I said, if I could be anything like that and hold an audience like right here, it would be the best thing that I could ever learn from her. And she was. And you would ask something about why this cast we liked each other so much. I've done a couple of national tours, and what I find is that the star always sets the tone, and she treated us like her kids. Mm-hmm. And I loved that. And because of that, there was this joy and celebration every night when we did the show.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to bring also, and thank you for that, I'm going to bring on Terry Lacy. Here you are, Terry.
Terry.
guys.
Terry, what's up?
And
Long
Terry,
time no see.
talk about your first time on stage with Carol Channing and your memory of that. Were you able to really drink in the enormity of what was happening?
Well, to back up just a little, and again, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
My first time on stage with Carol was a little more mental. Hello, Dolly was the very first Broadway show I ever saw at the age of 13
Wow.
in Little Rock, Arkansas. And, I was, oh God, little gay boy, I was so hooked immediately. So when it actually turned out that I got to perform with her, it was incredible and unbelievable. I really couldn't imagine something like that happening in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it still comes as a bit of surprise to me. Early in my auditioning career, I more often than not went, I'm an okay dancer. I'm not that great. But those few occasions when a choreographer saw something in me, and I really connected with Jack Craig, who recreated it the first time that I did it on a stock tour. And I still couldn't believe he liked me so much that he actually let me sit down halfway through the audition. And I went, I guess he doesn't like me and I'm done. But it was exactly the reverse. He already knew he wanted me. But then, when you get on stage with Carol, frankly, I was scared shitless of her every night that I went on stage with her. It's hard to match that kind of energy and that kind of personality. And I wanted to desperately, and I wanted to please her desperately, and I was never quite sure that I got there.
Well, thank you.
That's where I came from.
Well, one of the great things about Terry, and one of the great things about Dolly is that the show is so beautifully constructed and crafted that the scene changes are choreographed.
Jan Newberger. Jan.
Jan Newberger. Oh my God.
Jan, before you speak, you are muted. So unmute yourself and welcome aboard.
How do I do it?
There
you are.
There you are.
Oh my gosh, I had full screen and okay. I didn't think this was going to happen.
That voice.
The minute you put me up there, I started to cry.
Oh,
Everybody.
Well,
Maybe.
okay, cry.
40
We can all cry
years.
together.
Good God. And you all mean a lot. You mean a lot to me.
Oh.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. It's a pleasure to be here on your show. Thank you.
So
Thank
Jan,
you, Sarah, for making
no,
this
absolutely.
happen.
She's my guardian angel, and I'm not letting go of her. So, Jan, I want to ask you: had you worked with Carol Channing before, or was this also your first experience with her?
First experience with her, and first exposure to her legend. Really, I had never seen her perform in person, and somehow I got to be 29 years old without understanding quite what that entailed. So I wasn't as frightened of her as I should have been. I should have, I should have been quaking in my boots the whole time. But what I want to say, the most important thing I want to call to memory about the I did, and I only did the first one, is that my mother died while we were on the road. And I was allowed to go home once, to fly home once to see her in the hospital. And then I went home again so that we could bury her. And Carol and Charles were so kind. They helped me financially. There was just no question about what was the most important thing that needed to happen at that time. And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget their kindness at that time. and I might add, everyone else in the company. It was so emotionally impactful to have that family at that time. So thank you all.
Oh.
Well, God bless you, and thank you for sharing that story with us. When was the last time that you saw Carol?
Probably our last performance, because I was not invited back for very good reasons. I was not very good as Minnie Fay. And
you were fantastic.
No, let's not even argue about it. I wasn't what Carol and Charles and the powers that be wanted in a Minnie Fay, and that's all that mattered. So I take it back.
Really?
So the last time I saw her was, and Robert will remember this, I think, was at the opening of Forbidden Broadway 84, in which I played Carol.
Yes, Carol. Was I in that with you?
You came in the next year, David.
See, I didn't get to do Hello Dolly with you, but years later we did Forbidden Broadway together, and you played Carol Channing.
Yes, we did. Yeah. Most memorably, and I just will say something quickly about that. But at this point, it was Patrick Quinn.
Right.
So there was Patrick with her Cornelius, or Carol with her Cornelius, and me as her. And when I have to tell you, I will never forget it. When I came out in the headdress and and doing the mugging and everything, we did about 5 minutes together. Her at the table and me on the stage, and the audience, they were lapping it up. They were licking it off the floor. They were eating it with a spoon. It was just wonderful.
Well, thank you for that. Before I bring our next guest on, and I'm going to have to take someone off because StreamYard only allows 10 people on screen at any given time. So don't take it personally if I bump someone to bring someone else on. But I want to ask you, since Jan, you have the experience of performing as Carol Channing on stage, I know that anytime anyone tells a story about Carol Channing, they always go into the Carol Channing voice. So, Casella, I will start with you. What's your favorite Carol Channing story in which you have shared a story using her voice?
There's so many. And everybody knows them. I think it was, for some reason, she had this obsession with my blonde hair and getting roots and letting it grow out. So I don't know who's going to remember this here. Probably Terry, and probably Robert, and probably Kevin. When I would let my roots grow out a little bit, before the Dolly number, there was the big staircase behind the set, right, that you'd climb up on. And all the boys would be downstairs in their garb, stretching out and, gossiping and talking. She started saying to the boys, "Tell her she needs to do her roots." And then after the number, all the boys would run by the girls' dressing room and would go, "Carol sister, do your roots," and run off. She was obsessed with my roots.
Okay, so the only one that will remember this is Terry LaPole. So we were doing the act in some dinner theater in Toledo, Ohio. And Carol had put a country western number into the act, and it required a banjo. So they hired the local musician. It was just Terry and Winston Welch, and then everybody else got hired locally. And we did the act, and suddenly the banjo in the country song wasn't there. So Terry summoned the player into the dressing room, which was, of course, the kiss of death. And he said, "Well, Miss Channing, my friend wanted to buy that banjo, and he gave me $30 for that banjo, and I just couldn't pass it up." And I was ready to run out the door because I knew what was coming. And Carol turned to Charles and said, "Did you hear that, Charles? He got $30 for his banjo, which is why he couldn't bring it to work tonight." And then That's the most unprofessional thing I've ever heard. And the rest is history. Right, Terry?
And
Hi.
Terry, now back to you. So your favorite Carol story, utilizing her voice.
Since I did the act with her, you know, often her patter was syllable for syllable. It seemed spontaneous, but it was, boy, and I had every syllable printed in a book. So if she went up, I could tell her that all I had to give her was one preposition, in, and she'd go right on. But I think what the kids enjoy so much when I'm teaching is the curtain speech. The curtain speech after every performance with the cast on stage, and oh, you dear people of local city and environs. I know that many of you people are the same people that I for one have played to before, right here in local city. Isn't that true? Isn't that true? Local joke, local joke, local joke. And then this is when they would rehearse. They would throw in local city and local joke, local joke. And oh, I tell you, you're the same people. You just smell the same. Oh, I mean, the same waves of friendship and warmth are coming up here as did before. And you're exactly as I told the company you're going to be, only more so. And
exactly right.
And those monologues of hers, the monologues from Dolly and the monologues from the act about how she got into show business, and how she saw Hello Dolly with Barbara Streisand in the airplane. All those monologues I know to this day, syllable for syllable, and can recite them. And they will never leave me. They're like lasered into my brain.
That's incredible. Thank you for that. Terry, I'm going to take you off the screen for a little bit, but I will bring you back.
Okay.
So don't worry about that. You will be back. And I'm going to bring this nice gentleman on here. John?
John!
Now, John, I have a photograph that you sent me that I'm going to share with everyone here. I think, here we are. There you are, down. Hello, John. Welcome aboard. How are you?
I'm well, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm just going to cut to the chase with you. Your favorite go-to story about Carol in which you recreate her voice.
Well, we were in the Harmonium Gardens. Patrick Quinn was trying to pants Jan Neuberger behind the curtain. But separately from that, Carol went up. So St. Louis Cardinals were playing Milwaukee in the World Series, and they won in the middle of the. So we were playing the Fox, and it was 5,000 seats in those days. Looked like an airport runway, and the jokes landed flat because there was a second lag before the sound of the audience laughter came back to us. So it took us a day or two to figure that out and then be able to play with it. But in the last game of the World Series, half of the audience had small antenna radios or small TVs in the audience to watch the game because, of course, they had purchased their tickets months in advance, never knowing the World Series was going to be on that day. And weird sounds would erupt. Oh, yay! All through the performance, right? So halfway through the second act, Van de Gelder and Karen were Tom Batten. We're having dinner, and the place erupted in an enormous cheer. Now, Carol had been at the ball game before the game in an way oversized St. Louis hat, So she stood up and she said, "Oh yes, my team won! Isn't that great? Now everybody, please stand up. Let's have a cheer for." So we did. They did, and then she sat back down, and she had no idea where she was. So Tom Batten gave her a couple of cues. He said her line, said his line. No, nothing. She'd look at the audience with those big eyes, look at Tom, look at the audience, nothing. And then David, the stage manager, came out and he read from the script on the stage. He read both lines back and forth. Nothing. She's there looking at the audience, looking at him, looking at Tom. Isn't it great how he always knows the lines? Rudolph, I'm hungry. Let's eat. Now, half of the chorus boys weren't dressed yet. No one had their props. It was a good 3 minutes before we should have had them enter, right? And from the Harmonium Gardens, it was a backless curtain. We could see the chaos in the wings while everyone was fighting with each other to get their shish kebab or their pile of plates or whatever it was that they were getting. And everyone came running out in different, dress with shirts half off and everything else. It was genius. It worked.
That's amazing. Kevin and Jennifer. And Jennifer, we haven't even heard from you yet. So Jennifer, we'll start with you. Great, there she is. So your first experience, first of all, of being on stage with Carol Channing, and then your favorite go-to Carol story in which you recreate the voice.
Okay. Well, it was, first of all, my first national tour, and I'm doing it with this huge star, and she was just magnificent. And I was one of the people that rode on the cart with her at the beginning, and it's called on, and she was right beside me with Dolly Levi, which was wonderful. But my little story that I have that used her voice, the tour was in 2 parts, and I did the first half, and then we had a little bit of a break. And on that break, I was lucky enough to be cast in the original company of La Cage aux Folles, and because of Jerry Herman. And but he told me at the audition, he said, now I have to ask Carol for permission to take you out of the second half of the Hello Dolly tour. And so they got back to me and they said, we talked to Carol and we said, Carol, Jennifer Smith was cast in La Cage. We would like to ask your permission for her not to do the second half of the tour. And she took a minute and she went, who? Her permission, and I appreciate
That's great. And Kevin?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm supposed to tell a story with Carol.
Your go-to story.
Well, all of my Carol Channing stories are based in 1 week when I went on for Michael Booker in New Orleans, because he played Ambrose and I understudied him. So it was really the most I talked to her in that whole tour was during that week, because Ambrose and Dolly are with each other at the top of the show. So I'm sure Michael has tons of stories from hanging out with her at the top of the show. But one of them was, we came off during a matinee and she just looked at me and said, all of their husbands are dead. I went, what? And she said, all of their husbands are dead. I could feel them with me as I was talking to Ephraim, because she had just had her little monologue with her dead husband, Ephraim Levi. So all of her husbands are dead. All of their husbands, sorry.
All of their husbands, that's great. I'm going to take the two of you off camera for a few moments, but don't go anywhere. We have another special guest here, and this is Jane Dorian.
Hello, everyone.
I am so thrilled that Jane is here. Yesterday would have been Jerry Herman's 90th birthday.
Wow.
And Jane, you have a very interesting story about your audition for Hello.
Well, I do. So just to bring everybody, including your audience, up to date, not only was I in Hello Dolly, but I'm also Jerry's goddaughter. So really and truly, there was never a time in my life when there wasn't Carol Channing and obviously Hello Dolly. And so Jerry did not believe in nepotism. So I snuck into an audition, and I'm obviously from New York, not a Texan, although I did live there for 3.5 years. And I danced, and Charles looked and he said, I like that one. I like her legs. And Carol said, she's adorable. I'm brought back for second call auditions, and Jerry just looks at me and puts his head down and he said, kid, you got the show. So that was it. But actually, I started out as a dancer, And in Los Angeles, the Ermine Guard fell ill and I had to go on. And Carol was unbelievable because, you know, you have this big floppy hat as Ermine Guard, you can't see, and you're just dragged either by Carol or by Ambrose. Michael, thank you so very much. And so she said, don't worry. She said, when I squeeze you, you cry. And let me tell you, she squeezed more times than she should have. And I cried and I got the laugh, and thereafter I got the job. So that was a lot of fun. But I really do think, getting back to some of the themes that you all discussed, Dolly is one of the most perfect shows. And honestly, you ask why we all got on. Every night we fell in love together. When Davis sang "It Only Takes a Moment," you'd have to be dead not to get chills coming down your spine. And trust me, I've heard all of the all of the people sing all the songs. I mean, I can remember as a child, Carol Channing and Charles Nelson Riley would come down and they would do fabulous tricks with Hershey bars coming down from the ceiling. And God love, Charles Nelson Riley, he was wonderful, but he just didn't have the voice that Davis has. And so I think there was that camaraderie. And I also think this was a particularly smart group of people. When you think about the structure of the show, I mean, if you just think about the dance sequence that goes from dancing all the way to that monologue, and when she says, "Ephraim, let me go," not one word, and yet scenery, life, everything happens musically. That's kind of genius. And I think we were all affected by it in our own way, shape, and form. And then we were also cut-ups. I mean, we did a horror film together called 18 East Elm Street. And apparently I am the only person that has a copy, which I will be sharing, which will be a lot of fun. And I think Terry also brought up another amazing thing about Carol Channing. I've never seen a performer so connect with her audience. Nothing would faze her. And I can remember, she thought that the audience was getting bored. She would say, "Tempe, Tempe, Tempe." And like, Terry, we would all feel for you because you were perfect. But like, she decided to pick up the pace. She just always knew. And I think she was one of the most brilliant marketers, literally from day one. At the end of each show, she would encourage the audience to stay there, and she would talk to them and answer all their questions, which is one of the ways I think she got repeat business over decades and decades and decades. And she was way ahead of her time in terms of that. And she was very generous to all of us, and she never stopped being generous. I remember when I had my daughter, I mean, the gifts came. She always remembered my daughter's birthday with the best new Barbie doll that was on the market. But Carol was also remarkably smart. And I think sometimes behind that big blonde wig, people forgot just how educated and how smart she was. So I will wrap up with my favorite Carol story. As you know, she had a horrible food allergy that was born out of a bad hair dye situation. And the smell of that buffalo meat was enough to puke a buzzard. It was dreadful. So, we were in Seattle, and there was that wonderful Pike's Fish Market. And she said, "Oh, Jane," she said, "I would love to have a piece of fish." She said, "But I need to get one that has no brine on it or it'll make me very sick." I said, "Carol, not a problem. I will personally go and find you a piece of fish." And I said, "Carol, I spoke with a fishmonger. He assures me it's just fresh." And she looks at me and she says, "How did you know?" I said, "Because he had Hemingway eyes." And she said, "You're right. This fish will be fine." So that is the truth. But like I said, Dolly was a magical experience, but it was a magical experience not only for all of us who performed in it, but for audience members, and I hope for generations to follow. It's a farce. It will live on forever.
Absolutely, and thank you for that.
Well,
Robert, go ahead. I want to ask you, Robert, what is the biggest impact that Carol Channing has had both on you personally and artistically?
Well, I wouldn't have had a career without Carol and Charles, because I didn't know. I got this job as a fluke. Charles literally said to me, can you cook? And I said, can I cook? No, nothing. Anyway, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I learned from Charles and Carol about show business and what it was to run a show. And we had a company manager named Marion Finkler, who I worked with very closely because I worked for the Star. And she said to me, you could do this. And I said, really? And then the company manager for both tours, and then Jerry's girls as well. And then she took a leave of absence, and somebody came in and replaced her. And he said, you could do this. And after that, he hired me for the next show he was taking out. And that's how I got my career. But the thing about Dolly artistically is it's as Jane said, it's such a perfect musical. It's so beautifully staged that Terry and Lucia recreated what Gower Champion did. And not only is the music and lyrics wonderful, and Michael Stewart's book, and it's so funny, but there's always the Thornton Wilder in there. And Carol never, ever, ever forgot that.
Thank you.
And they still kept in touch with, I remember meeting a few times in New York, Isabel Wilder, Thornton Wilder's sister, who they stayed in touch with. And that's what made the property so wonderful, is it combined musical comedy with the great wisdom of Thornton Wilder. And Lucia and Terry were able to recreate that on the stage. The scene changes the choreography of the scene changes were unbelievable. So.
And Davis, I want to ask you, what do you think is the biggest misconception that people have about Carol Channing? She is this bigger than life personality. She's a clown. She said that Emmett Kelly was her muse when she was younger. So what do you think is the biggest misconception that most people have about her?
I think Jane had said it. She was a very smart, intelligent woman. That persona really wasn't who she was off the stage. I mean, I remember the first time in Hawaii, we closed in Hawaii, you remember, and Charles and Carol invited me to dinner the last night that we were in Hawaii, and I went over to their hotel room, and she was on the floor like in a split. I didn't know who it was. I never saw her without the wig before, and it was just this brown hair and a ponytail, and she was eating carrots on the floor, and I didn't know who it was. So it was a whole different person that I found out who that was, and then for the rest of her life, spending the weekend with her and knowing her without all of that stuff. She was a true intelligent, smart, sensitive, and she told me stories about her childhood and where she came from. And in fact, when I left that Palm Springs weekend with her, she came in the bedroom and came out with a box from like Kinko's, just like a cardboard box. She said, Davis, I've written a book. And I went, oh, that's nice. Will you take this home and read it and let me know what you think? So she gave me a copy of her autobiography before anyone had seen it. And it's amazing. And she told me about all the trauma that she went through and the marriages and all of that stuff. So I knew her as a person. And she was a very sweet person. But to me, I don't know any other stories, but I've always said that she couldn't have been more kind and supportive and nice to me, and that's all I know.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Mike, you as well. What is the biggest impact that she has had on you, both artistically and as a human being?
Well, I don't think a lot of people, or at least those not on stage, understood how generous Carol was. I mean, we all knew the show was called Hello, Dolly, and she played Dolly. But for myself, and I know some of the others in the cast, she took a lot of time meeting our friends, our families, our girlfriends, our boyfriends. I sat through a couple of photo sessions with her that she just gave of herself, and it was really nothing for her, but it was publicity that I could use in Wichita for a performance. She would send, I received a couple of telegrams from her when I would work. and building us up, building me up, and had nothing to do with her. But her generosity of time, and I do remember, I'm not sure, you were cutting out. Carol used to eat fish. I'm sure Robert probably steamed some of this. She used to eat fish. She did at the bottom of the staircase before the Dolly number and eat cold fish. And Terry, how your dancers ever survived. She would come down those stairs singing Hello Dolly, and all you could smell was fish. But whatever worked for her, it worked. It worked.
Well, God bless her. Elizabeth?
Richard.
Yes.
Robert has a hilarious story about grilling her food on the balcony of the Adolphus Hotel in Dallas.
Okay.
No.
Robert, please tell that story, please.
So it's not about. Well, first of all, I smelled like fish for 15 years after.
And lamb.
Yeah.
And lamb.
We were at the Adolphus Hotel in Dallas, Texas, when we started this Dolly tour, and it was a beautiful hotel. It is a beautiful hotel. There was a big patio, outdoor patio with an awning over it, and that's what I used as my kitchen because we traveled with an oven and all the cooking utensils, and it was Father's Day, and we had a matinee, and Charles loved cherries and popcorn. So I got them back to the hotel, settled in. I was going down to my room to get dressed for a night out with the boys, and all of a sudden I hear, Robert, fire. Oh, motherfucker. So I go back in, and I go outside, and on the hot plate are flames shooting up, and there she is, wig off like this, and I could get away from the smoke, and the flames are shooting up, and I put it out, and I said, what happened? And she said, it's Father's Day, and I was making popcorn for Charles, but I was too busy cleaning my eyelashes and forgot that it was there.
Oh, that's great.
And also, she had all of the Tiffany boxes to transport her food. But I did want to share one other story, even though it's funny. I think it's very revealing. She and I snuck into a matinee of E.T. when it first came out. And about halfway through, I was watching her, and she was beyond mesmerized. Those wheels were going, and she grabs my hand, and she said, you know, I could play E.T.'s mother with the finger going like this. She said, do you think Jerry would musicalize it for me? But the brilliance of what it was is she had such self-awareness of who she was and her physicality. And you know what? It would have worked. I mean, she is amazing, but she was always thinking. Those creative juices were always going. She did not have a stagnant mind. And even though she did thousands and thousands of performances of Hello Dolly, she still made it fresh every night. And that is talent. We played tag sometimes. She made it real every night.
Well, we had those movie nights. They would rent out every once in a while. When there was a movie they wanted to see, I would call the local movie theater and rent out
there were two
auditorium right after the show and we would come in. She loved being behind the popcorn stand and giving everybody their popcorn and candy, and it was just us in the auditorium watching the movies. And then if there was ever a day off, which wasn't really in their vocabulary, we would go on. Charles would say, well, we're going on a movie drunk today. And Carol and Charles and I would see movies one day.
Wow.
You know, and I'd like to add to this. Mm-hmm. She rented 2 theaters when we were on tour. We saw An Officer and a Gentleman and My Favorite Year. Do you guys remember, any of you?
I remember My Favorite Year.
Yeah, and they closed the theater for us, and there were other patrons with their noses against the glass going, what's going on? What's going on?
I remember E.T. She rented E.T.
Yep.
She rented
she
the whole
loved
theater.
It so much, she wanted to see it again.
Yeah.
And there's another story connected to that about the kid in the car next to her said, "Look, Mom, it's E.T." Remember that one?
Oh
and
my
then
God.
and then she decided to put bowls of Reese's on the piano. Oh God, she was hilarious. But she rented out 2 theaters, catered it, opened concession stands, closed the theater for us, chartered buses to take us there. Yeah.
So she truly was a grande dame of the theater, and there just aren't that many of them left.
Exactly. When I was in Palm Springs with her, we had lunch at like Marie Callender's, just a normal like lunch place, and we were sitting in a booth and talking, and then people would come up to her and say how much they loved her, and they how beautiful she was, and she was close to her 90s by now, and she goes, "Davis, how do they know who I am?" I said, well, it's your voice, for one thing, kind of carries through the restaurant. And second of all, look at you, And she goes, "Well, I haven't done anything in a long time." And I said, "Well, they remember and they love you, and we all love you." And she just like, "I don't understand. How do they know who I am?" It was amazing. It's like
one time they were in New York, and they lived at the Regency Hotel, and there had been some blizzard, and the city was paralyzed, and so they couldn't go out. But Charles would go out to meetings, but Carol was stuck in the suite. And one day, she came out of the bedroom in what we call it was a fox jacket with a hood called the chinchilla, and she had that on. No wig, no makeup, no nothing. And she said, "Robert, give me a couple dollars. I'm going out." And Charles said, Where do you think you're going?" She said, "Charles, I cannot stand being in this suite one more minute. I've got to go out and take a walk and get some fresh air." But baby, your wig's not on." She said, "Charles, who the hell would look at me right now and say Carol Channing?" And off she went.
Oh, that's great. Well, we are going to run a little over today, which I hope is okay with everyone.
Oh yeah.
But I want to. I'm going to go around, and I'm going to give each of you, and then I'm going to bring those that are off screen back on for a moment. And I will start with you, Robert. Once again, I'm going to give each of you a chance to have your final word today. Anything that you want to expound upon that we talked about today that you want to build upon. Anything that we didn't talk about that you wish that we had, or just any message that you want to put out to everyone now, either about Carol Channing, Sherry Herman, hello, Dolly. And again, thank you all for being here today. And thank you. That's all I can say. Robert, I'll start with you.
Well, look, she was a great star, a great woman, very smart, as Davis said. And she and Charles changed my life, and they changed a lot of people's lives. And they were extremely generous, and I had a blast.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for being here today.
Thanks.
Thank you. Davis?
Sure. She changed my life as well, but I learned so much from her on stage about comedy and timing and the business of show, as Robert was saying. When each city she did publicity, and she would take me along with her to each TV station, and she would do the weather. And she would take over as the weather woman and say, "There's a big storm here at the Fox Theater tonight." And I learned promotion from her. I learned all of that stuff about the business of theater and also the comedy just by watching her work. And have you guys seen us on YouTube? There's somebody that has clips of our show.
Yes.
Yes, of our show, the 83, 85, 23. I don't know where they got it from and what theater we were in, but it's on YouTube, and it's just makes me weep to see it again and watch all of us and the hat shop scene and the dancing scene. And if you haven't, look it up. I don't know how you find it, but it's there. It's amazing.
Thank you. And thank you, Davis, for joining us today and being here. Thank you.
Of course, Richard. Anytime. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Mike?
Well, it was a chance of a lifetime. It was a lifetime. I can't imagine another performer like her. Can't imagine. It was like a master class every evening. I would like to mention to anyone who might be listening or watching to remember your your Actors Fund care homes around the country. We've got a couple of them. I've been visiting the Actors Fund care home here in New York or in Englewood, New Jersey for 15 years. And going there every Saturday is also going to a master class. The folks in these care homes are predominantly performers, stagehands, musicians, dancers, and you can learn the world from sitting back and listening to these folks who did the originals, and the originals. So please support your Actors Fund care home.
And thank you for that. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for being here. Elizabeth.
I was going through a tough time at that during the Dolly tour. My marriage was kind of breaking up at the time, and so being on now Jan, I'm going to cry. Being on tour with all of you was exactly what I needed at that time. And Terry, Lacy, and Davis, I fell in love with both of you. A lot of good it did me, but thank you. Thank you. And so what to say about working with Carol? I mean, I was in awe of her. I don't think I was a real, I grew up in the West. I grew up in Utah. We didn't really understand what Broadway was, but we understood what movies were. And I had fallen in love with her from Thoroughly Modern Millie. And so, the first thing I think I said to her was, will you say jazz babies? Yeah. So, working with her just taught me, here's what it taught me. It taught me how to be a colleague, and it taught me how to treat other people and never to take myself seriously, no matter what role I was doing, because she was so generous and so kind. She even, even years later, she would ask, how is your niece, Holly? And Jordan, they're just so cute. And she met them once in San Francisco. So I was in awe of her, and I was in awe of all of you as well. I loved you all.
Thank you. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. I cut you off.
No worries. Thanks for finding me.
Well, thank you. Terry.
Yeah. Quick one. God, I love you and miss you, Elizabeth. Please, let's get together soon, in one way or the other. I'd like to turn just a little bit of attention to Jerry. Jerry, for me, was a huge part of this experience. First of all, the man was totally adorable. He was the sweetest man you could ever imagine. I still remember I was dance captain in swing, so I wasn't on stage a lot. When these guys were rehearsing in Dallas, I got to sit with Jerry in the audience many nights watching the show. And we just had the best time talking about not only the show, but everything in the world. He was a sweetheart. In addition to that, Jerry gave me my big break in the sense that when we were in Seattle, apparently the choreography had been watered down for our production. And Jerry came to me directly and said, do you think maybe you could fire up the choreography a bit? Which just was an amazing ask. And of course I wanted to do that and try my hand at it. And whether I succeeded or not, when Jerry finally saw it, which was in LA, he gave me the biggest hug. And I still remember that hug now and for the rest of my life. So that's my 2 cents. A great, huge part of the show. Lovely man. Lovely man.
Absolutely. And thank you. Thanks for being here. Jan.
The work ethic. That is probably my biggest takeaway. I was lucky enough to be invited onto the flight that Terry spoke about before. I forget from where to where, but it was Patrick, Quinn, and the evening would not be complete without saying what a hole in our hearts there is. Speaking of all this and revisiting it. And I hope that, I hope our pal is, I hope he's getting a little of it, a little of the love. Anyway, Pam Colt and John Galogli and myself and Charles and Carol got on a small private plane, and we were urged, of course, before we left, to bring as little with us as possible and to put as much on the truck. Nevertheless, there was the door to the restroom of the plane was blocked by the luggage. Well, we had sandwiches and beer, and yours truly, whose bladder is the size of a pea, it's even worse now. I couldn't make it. I knew that I was not going to make it. And it just got more and more urgent and more painful. And finally, Carol stood up and said, well, here's what we'll do. You pee in a cup. And she handed me a plastic cup, and she said, I hold up my fur coat, and you just stand behind it, and you just pee in a cup. And that's what I did. And it was just the shining. Of course, then I got stuck with the rest of the flight with a cup of pee in my hand because there was no place to put it. Nevertheless, that remains in my memory as a shining example of you do what you have to do. That's how the theater works. You do what you have to do. And she was the ultimate in work ethic, in making sure what needed to be done was done.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you for being here today.
I am just delighted, and thank you for having me. Thank you again, Kasira. This has been quite something.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Sean?
Well, I echo Jan's idea of how hard Carol worked. I mean, to go and do a show on a Sunday afternoon and then fly to another theater, another place, another city, and at 6 a.m. be doing talk shows on the radio and all day long, all night long, and then the next day, Tuesday, all day long, and then do the show again. I mean, she was just unbelievable. Stamina, and she was 60 when we did our tour, and her stamina was just off the chart. I also miss Patrick. Patrick was just nothing against anyone else who ever did it. I only worked with him, and I just thought he was absolutely fabulous. And Jerry cast both me and Patrick because we could sing. He didn't care if I could dance a lick, which I couldn't, and he wanted to hear his songs sung. And so we were very, very fortunate. I was very fortunate. Patrick had everything. He was a triple threat, but I was very fortunate to have met Jerry and have him cast me.
That's wonderful. And thank you for being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Sarah. Talk to you all soon.
Thank you. Thank you. Terry?
Yes. I was thinking, there's one little story that no one has ever heard. It was when I first met Carol during Sugar Babies. She was rehearsing. I'm very young, like 23, 22. We're rehearsing with Ernie Flatt, the choreographer, who was not an uncomplicated person. And he was giving her a lot of, he was one of the people who didn't really get her because he thought of her as, being silly, and he didn't really see. And even then, as a young kid, I knew there was something else going on with her. And so she was so funny, that everybody would laugh at everything she said. And Ernie's giving her this combination, and the whole group is in there. And she says, well, that's fine, Ernie, but what foot do I start on? And everyone laughed, just like you, Richard, because she's so entertaining. But I didn't laugh. I didn't laugh. I sat at the piano and I said to her very quietly, because she was nearby, I said, you start on your right. And she came over to the piano and she said very quietly, in a voice I had not heard, much lower, she said, thank you. And that was my immediate connection to her. And that's when I knew that she and I were going to get along,
Oh,
and I really have enjoyed seeing all these amazing people today, and it means a lot to me. We've been through a lot. We in 1982, we opened in Los Angeles, and Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor sat in the front row right behind me. I heard Elizabeth Taylor laughing at Carol's jokes, and the same night, I heard about a new cancer that gay men had. And this is when Maroc was well. And I first heard about that, and I've been living with it now for, I don't know, almost 30 years. Okay. And, but it all goes back to that night when I first heard the word. It didn't even have the word AIDS yet. It was just, yeah.
We lost Victor 4 too from our company.
Yes. Yes.
And a couple of others as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So that was just, those are the two things that really stand out for me. And I make use of all of this information as a teacher so much, and it gives me so much pleasure to get to share it and some of her expertise. So, and I'm so glad to see you, Richard, in person after all these years.
I know. So, well, we're going to really get together in person someday. I just really love that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Kevin and Jennifer.
Hey, you want to go
Hello.
first?
Yeah. For me, it was such a wonderful experience. Carol was the magic on stage, but off stage, you all were my magic. So I loved you all then and still love you and will love you forever. And thank you so much for sharing your evening, because it really is quite special. Thank you, Kasira.
Thank you. Thank you. And Kevin?
I just wanted to just go back to the idea of the show and what the show means so much. Like I said, when I was 10 years old, I was in a local high school production of Hello, Dolly. I think that was 1972. And I had a little paperback book of the script from that production. So this was like something that was probably put out in the late 60s or the 70s. And in that book, it had photos of every woman that had played Dolly.
I have the book.
Yes.
Yes.
And I would look at this picture of Carol Channing, and it was her coming down the staircase. And I remember standing on stage at the Dallas Summer Musicals, sorry, and basically seeing what I looked at in that book as a little kid. And then I was standing in the middle of history. And I just still think about that to this day. And I remember I totally understood it, like, because I had grown up with that book, and I thought, I can't believe I'm here, and there's Carol Channing coming down the stairs just in that photograph, and it still means the world to me. That's all. Absolutely. And I love you all. It's so good to see everybody.
It's always good to see you. Thank you both for being here. Thank you. Jane.
Yes. Parting thoughts. First, Richard and Kasira, thank you so much for organizing this, and what a treat it is to see all of you. But my parting thought is how grateful I am to have lived in a time of Jerry Herman music and lyrics and the brilliance of a Carol Channing. And I'm going to treasure that experience for the rest of my life. And I just wish and pray for future generations that they have songs and characters and emotions that make them want to sing again and live again and love again and dance again. All those things that we collectively, because of our generation, know about. And I'm fearful that it won't be available to future generations. So I guess it's really incumbent upon all of us to keep on singing and dancing and imparting this information and the joy that only American musical theater can bring to us all.
Thank you. And thank you for all the work you do, by the way. So thank you so much. Thank you. Kasira, before you speak, I just want to thank everyone for being here today. When Kasira first reached out to me and asked me to do this, I was blown away that she entrusted me with this. That means a lot, because this show has a very special place for me. I even have a website, callondolly.com. check it out and read about all the other Dollys and some of the stories about these two tours. I want to thank you all for being here today. I hope that you will all of you that were on the show today and all who are watching, please subscribe to Richard Skipper Celebrates on YouTube. My show is all about celebrating life, celebrating love, celebrating art, celebrating artists. And that's what Hello Dolly is all about to begin with. So this means so much to me. If you enjoyed today's show, please hit the like button, leave a comment on YouTube, and share this with your friends, and that will increase the ranking with this. And we are not done. We are going to be back here on the 25th of July, because Cyril will be back with me again. And we're going to be hearing the stories from the chorus members that are going to be joining us. So the story will continue and come back for part 2. I also end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Go to your Facebook friends list, and the second name that pops up, reach out with a phone call. Not an email message, not a text message, not a private message, but a phone call. And let that person know what they mean to you. Because as my dear friend David Friedman says, we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. And you never know what someone else is going through right now. But if you're going to be out on a boat, make sure that you bring a skipper along. Now, Sarah, I'm going to leave the screen, and I'm going to give you the final word. Anything that you want to say about anything that we talked about today, this is your chance. And I love you, and I'll see you back here in a couple of weeks.
Love you too.
Thank you.
Gosh, what an amazing moment this was. We truly were a family in those 2 tours, and I love it that we're finding each other again. Some of us have kept in touch over the years, but now those that want to be found have been found, and I truly hope we do not lose contact. It was doing the show with Carol was an amazing experience. The show touched our lives in many, many ways, and we touched each other in many, 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 many ways. And I love it that we are coming back together, and hopefully next year at our 40th anniversary, we can finally get together in person, which is one of the things we were talking about. But I just want to thank everybody for their time. I'm so looking forward to the interview in 2 weeks. It's going to be crazy. There are crazy, crazy stories to tell and a lot of laughing to do. But until then, love to you all. Have a good weekend. Bye.